I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Indaba Conversation with Chris, or with the Colonel. I think I need to change that title. But anyway, it's Indaba Conversation. Once again, this is Chris in Central Pennsylvania with my special guest today, none other than the Chief Executive Officer of South Africa's Free Market Foundation, David Ansara. David, well, I mean, neither one of us are Afrikaners, but hoe gaan dit?
Ek gaan goed. Now you're exposing my poor Afrikaans.
That's all right.
I think your Afrikaans is really better than mine.
I don't know about that, but let's just say we both need improvement. We'll leave it at that. Well, welcome back to the program. Hey, listen, I want to chat with you, and that's what we're going to do because, I don't know, you may have missed this. There was a bit of small news that came out of the U.S. this past week. Donald Trump in a red tsunami wiped out the wokeism of the left, and we're returning to an era of prosperity, hopefully. However, there might be some headwinds in that effort to go into prosperity, as Donald Trump has threatened tariffs and talked about targeting China and anyone who's not playing ball with him. We wonder if this is maybe bluster, or I've got my views on this, but I want to talk to you as a South African, as someone interested in the free market, someone who believes in the power of capitalism to lift people out of poverty. And if I've misspoken, correct me on any of those statements I made about you and the Free Market Foundation, someone that's interested in what is right, good, moral, and just in the world. Anyway, so what do you think? How are we doing? Are we headed for good shores? Is the ship still going to list hard to port, or maybe Trump can get the ballast in the right place? Okay, that's enough of that nautical maritime references. Your turn.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the world has been filled with choppy waters for the last 4 years as well. So I think a lot of analysts are saying, oh, Donald Trump represents a lot of uncertainty and volatility. That certainly he does have personal characteristics where he can shoot from the hip. But, you know, the world's been a pretty unstable, uncertain place for the last 4 years under the Democratic administration. So, you know, just on the geopolitical front, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, Iran running rampant, and, you know, through its proxies really destabilizing the Middle East. And in Trump's first administration, figures like Jared Kushner and others within the foreign policy team were really able to secure some pretty historic deals. So, I mean, we at the Free Market Foundation are not really that focused on geopolitics and matters of international security, but that is obviously very important when we talk about the political environment. So I think that's one lens that you can look at the Trump 2.0 or the reascendancy. And I think on balance, that's going to be positive to the world. And I think the, you know, peace has to be fought for and upheld, right? And I think what's very interesting about Trump's message on foreign policy is that it's actually a kind of a message of humility, that the United States might be this dominant military power in far exceeding the capabilities of any of its rivals, but it has to be more circumspect in terms of avoiding these forever wars, which have come at a huge expense to the fiscus. We're talking about $6 trillion, $7 trillion budgets that have been run both in the original Trump administration, you know, to deal with COVID and so on, but also throughout the Biden administration. So, you know, I think if we look at like some of the appointments in the cabinet, that really reflects a different posture with regards to foreign security issues. So we can maybe talk a little bit about the economic policy aspects, which I think is more our strength. But, you know, I think in terms of resetting and rebalancing global power, hard security issues, I think it's going to be a very positive development for the world.
Well, that's a fair point, but of course, as an intelligence analyst and consultant now, and a journalist, I do focus on geopolitical because, as you correctly stated, it does affect the economic situation. Geopolitical drives the economic situation in many respects, and it's ironic that you mentioned. We'll get on to. I want to get to AGOA and your thoughts on the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act and South Africa's participation in just a moment. But before we get to that, I would be remiss if I didn't go back to the geopolitical situation and talk about the irony of people around the world talking about Trump presidency being bad for the world and he's a danger and a threat to the world. But, and this isn't coming from a Trump sycophant or, a team Trumper, because I have my issues with Donald Trump, and that's for sure. But Donald Trump stroked the ego of Kim Jong-un, and suddenly North Korea stopped firing intercontinental ballistic missiles over the Sea of Japan and Japanese airspace in active war. Donald Trump ended ISIS in 4 months, a naive foreign policy failure that Barack Obama fostered unintentionally, which killed 1 million people throughout the Middle East. Ended it in 4 months. Donald Trump ended the conflict in Iraq and drew our forces down. Donald Trump ended the military operations in Afghanistan. There were none for 18 months before Biden decided to withdraw. He ended war after war after war, and Russia didn't invade Georgia or attack the banking infrastructure of Estonia or invade Armenia or get involved in Nagorno-Karabakh or any of that stuff, and they certainly didn't invade and occupy the Donbass and the Crimea and annex it during Donald Trump's watch. They were contained in many respects. So it's just ironic that all these people talk about Trump being a threat to world peace when the exact opposite, by and large, is what happened. Doesn't mean conflict disappeared under Trump, but much of it was reduced. So geopolitical, there you go. Let's get to the trade stuff. I mean, that's what we want to talk to you about. So a lot of Republicans, in my view, were making hay for election purposes in 2022. And again, this past year, as elections came up, looking for something to grasp onto, saying that, hey, South Africa ought to be taken out of AGOA. Now, I know AGOA. I've read the law, and I'm familiar with it. And from my perspective, frankly, South Africa is no longer qualified to be part of AGOA. Since 2018, the ANC's bandied about expropriation without compensation, which violates the concept of property rights in AGOA, and people who sign up to it for the access to our market promise to abide by property rights and protect them. So they're not eligible for that reason. Then in a more tenuous stretch, one could argue from DC that South Africa is doing things against the security interest of the United States, our national security, for instance, not voting against Russia in the invasion of Ukraine, doing maritime exercises with the Russians and Chinese off the coast of South Africa in the midst of a conflict where Russia's the global pariah. The Lady R incident, what did or didn't happen there, and the opaqueness of the government and how it addressed that. And the list goes on and on. Now we've got the ICJ case against Israel, which is not in the interest of the United States. And now we have the ANC telling Taipei must remove its embassy, its diplomatic mission from Hatfield. It's been there for decades. All of this is contrary to U.S. national security interest, and every one of those things arguably disqualifies South Africa for AGOA. So what are your thoughts on that first, and then we'll get to where you think it's going to go from there?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously AGOA is important, but I think maybe in the broader scheme of things, I think as a percentage of our exports globally and to the United States, relatively small, and high concentration on the motor industry as well, which it benefits in South Africa from extensive state subsidies through various programs initiated by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. And so, yeah, I mean, that does create several thousand jobs around the country, but it's subsidized industry, and ultimately it's taxpayers footing the bill for that. And then agricultural exports are a big part of AGOA as well. But you are right to say that South Africa has always been a bit of an anomaly when it comes to AGOA. It's not a traditional trade agreement per se. It's legislation that needs to be renewed. And South Africa is really a middle income country, whereas most of the beneficiaries of AGOA have been developing low income countries. And our posture in terms of our foreign policy positions being highly critical, but also actively threatening U.S. allies, I think is in violation of that. And as you point out, there's legislation before U.S. Congress, the South African Review Act, which is highlighting South Africa's role as a potential national security threat to the United States. And this was bipartisan legislation that in an era of extreme partisanship within the House. So clearly there is a feeling in the halls of Washington that South Africa is not really playing playing the role of a friend and ally as it once was. And so, look, I mean, I think if AGOA was pulled, that would send a very strong signal to South Africa that it's in breach of its commitments to its ally. And, I think there's a lot of posturing that happens. South Africa is very proud of its inclusion in BRICS. It has strong ties with the PRC. This relationship with Iran seems to be based on some kind of financial relationship. It's very difficult to prove. I mean, Helen Zille's been on record referencing this. And, the paper trail's maybe not there, but you see it in the conduct of South Africa in terms of its foreign policy missions. And the ICJ case, I think, was really in large part to shore up Iranian interests in the region. So, I think the important thing is that South Africa has some kind of trade relationship with the US. And I mean, there's nothing stopping South Africa from having a bilateral trade relationship with the US. But look, we're free marketeers. We don't feel like you need to have a trade agreement to give permission to trade. We feel that it's not countries that trade with one another, it's individuals. And individuals should be free to trade across borders. And I mean, we're speaking on our electronic devices now with our microphones and our cameras and our laptops. These are all the products of a globally integrated economy. These items are not made in any one particular country. They're the product of extensive global value chains. And so, maybe if I could just speak a little bit about what's driving this anti-free trade posture or position from the Trump administration. So what I observe is, and I think this is accurate, is that living standards have stagnated in the United States. And that has led to a buildup of resentment and concern amongst voters. So a lot of it was made in this election around cultural issues. That's another lens. What your view is on transgender rights or on abortion. In the build-up to the election, I mean, there were many commentators saying, women are going to be the defining constituency in this election and they're going to be gunning for Trump because of concerns around abortion. Trump was saying, well, look, he's going to leave that to the states, which I think was the appropriate thing to do, because it is obviously quite a contentious thing, and devolution of that issue, I think, is appropriate. But actually, I think what was driving the big swing towards Trump was actually bread and butter issues. And if you look at Trump's campaign, he was talking about things like the border, the cost of living, inflation, the issues around the size and scope of government, that business was too overregulated and so on. I mean, this is what's now driving the establishment of this Doge department of Elon Musk's and Vivek Ramaswamy's, which I'm very excited about. They want to cut $2 trillion off of that $6 trillion deficit, $6 trillion budget. And if anyone can do it, it's those two guys. But I believe that this inflation question was really hitting working class and lower middle class and poor Americans pretty hard. And so it's not just that the cost of living was going up, but that wage growth wasn't matching that. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And I think that the diagnosis is that it's all because of foreign competition, that you as the little guy on Main Street are being ignored by the powerful in Washington and on Wall Street, and that it's all because of these corporates that are offshoring their manufacturing capabilities to places like China and other Far East locations, and they're undercutting you, and we're now going to balance the scales and we're going to impose tariffs on these companies, on China, and China's going to pay their fair share. But I think that's a misreading of what's really going on. And it sells very well politically, and it ties in with this muscular approach to foreign policy and saying, we're going to be transactional. We're not going to uncritically support these global institutions like NATO or the United Nations and so on. We're going to put America first. So that geopolitical and the trade stance, I think, are kind of closely interrelated. But the United States is the world's biggest consumer market. It needs to, and is very much integrated within the global economy. I think more so, excuse me, than other economies, it can afford to put up the barricades more than other countries. But that doesn't mean that that's the correct economic policy program that it should be implementing. And ultimately, my fear is that it is American consumers who are going to bear the cost of higher duties on imports. That, you know, if you think of the cost of a phone, that's going to be 20, 30, 40% more expensive because the components or the importing of the finished product is just going to be essentially taxed by tariffs. So yeah, the Trump administration, the incoming administration, their argument is, well, if we put up these tariff barriers, that will force US companies and other companies to onshore their activities. And then the corollary or the other component of this is that income taxes will be lowered, which will help to stimulate employment and wage growth. And their bet is that that's going to offset the potential costs of the tariffs. I don't think that that's necessarily correct. We'll see what happens. And I think maybe some of the tariff talk is saber rattling, and maybe there won't be as much follow through. I mean, in the first week of Trump's first administration, he pulled out of, he what is it, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a Hillary Clinton and big kind of talking point. But that was this broad multilateral trade agreement, which often is a composite of all of these special interests and is really about countries bargaining with one another. That's kind of different to free trade. That's part of basically special interests kind of conceding here and granting concessions there. So that's not free trade. So you shouldn't assume that a free trade agreement necessarily reflects free trade. It's ultimately about balancing political considerations. So, Trump could do a lot to actually do the opposite of what he campaigned on, which is to actually remove barriers. And, the immigration question, I think, is also kind of analogous, because actually America has thrived on being open to talented, hardworking, skilled people from all over the world. And, I even see it in some of his cabinet picks, like Mr. Ramaswamy. So he at some point has spoken about high walls and open doors. And I think that's fine. But my concern is, maybe the anti-immigration rhetoric does actually kill one of America's strategic advantages, which is being a magnet for talent globally. So that's sort of some high-level views. I've got some other thoughts on monetary policy and what's driving inflation, but I want to have more of an interactive discussion. Yeah,
let's do. Well, I mean, I sometimes get accused by people who don't tune into the program very much just saying, well, shut up, let your guests talk. What they fail to understand is that this is a conversation, and so I'll let you go on to get those points out. So it's more of a conversation. But let me address the immigration. Then I want to come back to a few points about how I agree with you that the Trump campaign is misreading the tea leaves, but they're doing it for political purpose to win the election, and it worked. So will they really misread the tea leaves? We'll see. But I want to get to that. But immigration, the problem, David, is it's not immigration. We're not talking about immigrants. We're not talking people who have the energy, the entrepreneurship, the drive, or are trying to escape a system where they can't thrive, and they want to thrive in a country that has an open, free market with free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of worship, all these things. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about criminal alien invaders who are violating our sovereignty and pouring in by the tens of millions into our country. And then the government is facilitating that, picking them up by plane, flying them around the country illegally when we can't enter an aircraft in this country without what's called Real ID, which has biometric data. They're taking people who oftentimes ditched their documents at the river, at the border, or on the border in Canada, slipped in the country, and then claim they're someone they're not, and claim political asylum. And then the government, at our expenses, flying them to our communities, dumping in our communities. I see it right here in my own small peri-urban area. People who have no business being here, who are not legitimate immigrants, who are not contributing. In fact, we just had a number of people come to the election who've been here long enough now. They become citizens. They don't even speak English. They haven't tried to learn English. Every one of them was retirement age. And they were explaining to me how they registered to vote because I had to do a provisional ballot for one of them. They're talking about a government Department of Homeland Security website set up that helps them get a visa to come here. It helps them stay in the country once they've come in the country illegally. That helps them get a driver's license, helps them get grant money, and then all that, even register to vote, all of that at our expense. That's what we're talking about. I mean, the immigrants who come here, see, it's funny because the economists attacked America's immigration system years ago. That's one of the reasons why I finally dropped my 30-year subscription to The Economist. It became a propaganda rag I can no longer tolerate. Even though I read opposition, this is just so difficult. I trusted The Economist for so long. But the economists attacked America's immigration and praised Canada. But Canada's immigration system is much more circumspect and much more restrictive than ours is. They'll let you come in if you're an Indian doctor who has a PhD or is practicing in gynecology for years, or a lawyer, or a software entrepreneur. But they don't let people who have no skills and just want a better life come in. For the most part, that's most of the people crossing the border illegally in the United States. They just want a better life. Well, that doesn't give you the right to come here. I mean, that's the same thing in South Africa. Just because life is hard in Lesotho doesn't mean you get to go to Gauteng and dig a mine under someone's house and cause it to collapse. Anyway, the point here is that I think we need to make a distinction, and the Trump campaign doesn't do a good job doing it. There's a difference between immigrants, migrants. Migrants are temporary workers who come into the country legally to work and, pick cantaloupes or, macadamia nuts in California, things like that. And then between criminal alien invaders. And I'm talking about criminal alien invaders. That is a huge burden in our country. And we've had, as we've had reported, this isn't speculation, this isn't hyperbole, 659,000 convicted criminals in our country. These are people convicted by courts in other countries with lower standards of law enforcement and judicial systems. We have 16,000 convicted or 15,000 convicted murderers. Some have convicted murder in the States, others abroad. They're in the country. They should not be here. They should not be here at all. But immigrants are welcome. So what you talk about high walls but open doors, I agree with Trump on that. And that's not a xenophobic approach because we welcome people coming here. We have benefited immensely in our software industry. California has 500,000 Indians. That's been a great help to America. And that's just one example. So, and then look, we were stealing African Americans. Look at Elon Musk. We took him, and look at all that he's created. So, yeah, I think that's an important distinction when it comes to immigration because that term is thrown around and migrant is thrown around very loosely. And in my book, there's a distinction between an immigrant, a migrant, and a criminal alien invader. That's my position on that. Would you disagree with that, or do you think that's a fair?
Look, I think there are different categories, and there's been a lot of manipulation. Like I'm aware of a lot of some of these immigrant groups being flown into swing states in a deliberate attempt to try to skew electoral outcomes. But yeah, my question would be: who decides? What's the difference between a migrant and an immigrant and an asylum
Well,
seeker?
I can answer that very quickly. An asylum seeker rocks up at a border post of legitimate crossing and declares that they want to declare asylum. They need protection. A person who crosses your border illegally, dumps their documents, and claims that they're Juan Valdez, a coffee grower from Colombia who's being persecuted by gangs, is not a legitimate asylum seeker. A Haitian who goes through 4 countries to come to America is not a legitimate asylum seeker. A Haitian arrives on the shores of Mexico and claims asylum is a legitimate asylum seeker. That's a very easy definition in my book to make. People who violate your law are not legitimate asylum seekers. That's very clear in my book, and it's the same thing in South Africa. South Africa denied Roy Bennett political asylum. Now, they didn't kick him out of the country, but they denied him political asylum when he was being persecuted. His life was threatened by ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. And he was a deputy agriculture minister. He couldn't go back to the country because of it. And they denied him asylum. That's a case of a shameful conduct of not letting someone get asylum. But I'm talking about people, it's very clear they're not asylum seekers. They're fraudulent. There's no question about that in my book.
Yeah, and if there is a clear legal framework, then the rule of law should apply to that it should be applied fairly and equally. But yeah, I think maybe what a lot of people, and I'm not on the ground in the US, but maybe a lot of people are feeling like it's just very discretionary and for specific political purposes, like this issue around bringing people into swing states. And it's also not clear that the state should be subsidizing that kind of behavior as well.
Well, I agree with you 100%. It isn't clear, and that's because politicians leave the waters murky. But I deal in facts, and so for me, it's very simple. It's a basic rule of law sort of thing. I can't just go to South Africa and live there because I want to. If I overstay my visa, I'll be kicked out as an undesirable immigrant. Trust me, I know, because they tried to make me an undesirable immigrant when I didn't violate it, and I had to spend 6,000 rand to get it sorted out because of a mistake by an immigrant. Oh yeah, no. I came in January of last year to South Africa, and at OR Tambo he asked, or was it 20? Yeah, it was last year, and he said, "So you're back?" Because I come through there frequently. He says, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." He said, "How long are you here for this time?" I said, "I'm here for about 5 weeks. I'll be leaving in early February." Or for something like that. And then he stamped in my passport, instead of 90 days, he wrote a date 9 days later. Didn't realize it till 3 weeks later when I tried to cross the border in Botswana, and the DIRCO official at the border, she said, "Sir, I can't let you leave the country." I said, "Why, ma'am? If you leave, I'm going to have to stamp you as undesirable. You won't be able to come to South Africa for 5 years." I'm like, "What are you talking about? You've overstayed your visa." I'm like, "No, I haven't. I've been here 3 weeks. I get 90 days." She said, "That's not what your passport says, and that's what the computer says. You got 9." I'm like, "What?" So I had to spend.
You just left off a zero.
Yeah, so and they put the wrong date in there too. He scribbled a date in, but I couldn't read it. I couldn't read his handwriting. You know how officials are; they have handwriting worse than mine. So I looked at it, and it looked like it just looked like it said March, and it didn't say March. Anyway, so I had to spend 6,000 rand. So I mean that stuff happens. But anyway, let me get back to the other piece here too, and get off that contentious topic because we're here to talk about economics. So one of the reasons, but that applies here. But one of the reasons that I believe that the Trump team has misread the tea leaves, and the public in general has misread the tea leaves, is that what's driving our economic problem here in America. And by the way, David, it's not just lower income Americans; it's middle income and even upper middle income Americans that are struggling. I know a lot of people that are living off their credit cards at 19% interest and going deeper and deeper and spiraling into debt because of the price of goods. I mean, gasoline is still 45 to 50% more expensive than it was under Trump. That's not Trump or Biden's fault, although Biden does play a role because he made the market skittish, and caused some chaos in the global geopolitical scene, which drove up the price. But the issue here is that prices are off the charts. They're through the roof. It's insane. Everything. I buy Coca-Cola that comes in from Mexico because they make it with cane sugar, and I like that as opposed to high fructose corn syrup made from maize, which is disgusting. And I don't like to drink my Coke.
Well, that's because of agricultural subsidies.
You are 100%. You are 100% special interest, and because we have tax on sugar, we have the highest price for sugar in this world because we give subsidies to the beet growers in Louisiana, the cane sugar producers in Florida, and then we subsidize ethanol and maize. And yeah, absolutely, that should all be gone. If I was in charge, that would be cut tonight, and the world would be a much better place for Americans. But the thing that really is driving the problem here in our economy that the world is overlooking and the American policymakers are overlooking is government spending. The United States in the year 2000 spent $1.8 trillion for its budget. Now, even with inflation, there's no way you can explain to me why we're spending $7.4 trillion a year today. It's unnecessary. It's out of control. And it is well past, it's like still double and triple what inflation rate has been when you take the actual real dollars. So government spending, and $2 trillion of that this year is deficit spending. That's $2 trillion not available for the private sector for people to borrow, to expand businesses, to take risks, to buy homes. And of course, the interest rates are up now because they're trying to tame inflation. And that also plays a role here. But this government spending, this billions of dollars, trillions of dollars deficit spending is a real problem. And then on top of that, we have corporations in America, in South Africa, which used to produce most of its textiles and its shoes, but almost none these days, especially shoes, offshoring their production to Asia for a few cents on the dollar margin, which is coming back to bite them in the backside. 25 years ago, when I was in Ghana and I saw that American insurance companies were offshoring their business to Ghana because it's an English-speaking country and they were building IT networks at the time. But it was pretty simple then. It wasn't call centers. It was just, faxing or emailing documents to be transcribed manually. I said that's interesting and good for Ghana, but if businesses like insurance and banking start offshoring their call centers and health businesses, it isn't going to work. And it's worked very poorly, and a lot of that's had to come back to America. Same thing here with offshoring all of your production overseas. You've become highly dependent on a very geopolitically unstable region of the world where most of the shipping goes to the Straits of Malacca, and we have the South China Seas and China's abusive behavior there, and we have a volatile situation with North Korea, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam. We put all our eggs in one basket in Asia, and we're all going to pay a price for that. All of that, in my view, the deficit spending, stealing money from the economy, the higher interest rates driven by government policy, which is bad, and the offshoring as well as unfair trade policies by the world's worst transgressor in the World Trade Organization, the People's Republic of China. All of that plays a role in why we're all suffering. There's more to it, but that's just that's a 5-minute coffee table analysis. And what do you want to pick apart? Go ahead.
No, that's some good analysis. So I just want to go back to the deficit question. So, I mean, that $2 trillion deficit, I mean, that's pretty significant. And a lot of that is being financed by debt. And a lot of the bond issuance, the treasury bonds that are being issued are being and have been since the global financial crisis have been bought up by the US Federal Reserve, essentially monetizing the debt. And that has led to huge distortions within the US economy. So it's not only that the government is spending beyond its means and that there's capital misallocation, so taxpayers are footing the bill, but it's also leading to the driving up of the inflation indirectly through the excessive increase in supply of the US dollar. And the US dollar, it's the so-called exorbitant privilege that the US dollar is an international reserve currency. And that has meant that some of those inflationary effects have perhaps been delayed or kind of strung out. There's still high demand for US dollars. But I mean, 100 years ago, the world was using the Great British Pound, and that was an international reserve currency. And this is a characteristic of all fiat currencies that since 1971, since the gold standard has been dropped, there are just so many incentives to increase the monetary supply. And whenever there's some kind of financial shock, whether it was the GFC or the COVID crisis, a lot of that was self-inflicted. The temptation to let the money printer go brr has been irresistible. And we're now feeling the effects of that. And look, some officials in the Biden administration will say, well, like, inflation has leveled out. But inflation doesn't only express itself in CPI. I mean, look, just your anecdotal account of the cost of basic consumables and fuel, that's one thing. And I think many Americans probably will tell you that. But if you look at the costs of education, for example, the fact that the cost of tuition have just risen dramatically. There's a lot of other stuff going on there, like these growth of these bureaucracies and DEI departments and all these other kind of non-core functions. But the raw dollar amount for education is so high, and a lot of people are going into debt in order to finance their college education, and then taking forever to get out of that. So they on this perpetual slippery slope. That's how they start their career, which is, I think, hugely damaging. And that incentivizes them to go into some of these kind of corporate bureaucracies like management consultancies and big law firms and big tech, and not really taking risks on entrepreneurship, which is really where a lot of growth and innovation happens. So, I mean, another area is housing prices. I'm sure you know a lot of young people in your neighborhood who just haven't even contemplated buying a house because it's just so beyond their imagination. And what's happening is, because of this state interference in the monetary supply, there's been a lot of this excess liquidity that has needed to go somewhere in order to seek yields. And so if you're closer to the supply of money, to the spigot, if you're part of the financial system, then you get first preference with that capital, right? And so a lot of this excess money is going towards securitized assets, equities, other kind of financial products. And so we've seen a growth in equity markets, but it's being fueled by this artificial stimulus. It's kind of like a sugar high. But what the economy in America and many other countries need is more protein, not more sugar, because with a sugar high comes an insulin crash. And so I think that's what's driving a lot of this discontent. A lot of people, they see in their day-to-day life that this is not what it used to be. Reagan's old adage, is your life better today than it was 4 years ago? The answer to that is probably no. But
Well,
a lot
in
of
my
wealthy
case,
people
that's definitely. I can tell you. In my case, it's definitely not better than it was 4 years ago. Certainly not
you should
financially.
immigrate to South Africa, Chris.
Well, I could live like
life is pretty good here.
I could live like a king there as long as I can carry firearms and attach flamethrowers to my car on the N4.
Yeah. So and a lot of people, will agree with me, but then say, well, this shows that there's something wrong with capitalism.
No,
But
good
my
Lord,
view-
no. That's. I'm sorry, David. I'm gonna let you finish, but that's horse pucky. There's nothing wrong with capitalism.
Yeah.
It's a perfect system, supply and demand.
That's state interference.
Yeah,
all of
that's
that monetary thing.
exactly. And go ahead and finish, but I want to come back to that because that's when we talk about state interference in the marketplace. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, you have this essentially an arm of the government. The Federal Reserve is nominally independent, but it is a state institution. And as Mr. Ramaswamy has pointed out, there are 22,000 people working for the US Federal Reserve. What do they exactly do? I'm not sure. And a lot of it is people doing forecasts, so they're economists, analysts, trying to predict which way the economy will go. And this actually adds to the hubris of the Federal Reserve because they think of themselves as these monetary gods who can kind of determine which way they can influence the economy. But it's not actually the case, and they're actually reacting to things. So they're pulling one lever, and that's creating a whole lot of second-order effects elsewhere in the economy. And so I think the U.S. Federal Reserve needs to, Ron Paul would argue, and I probably agree with him, needs to be shut down. But at the very least needs to return to an extremely narrow mandate, and could probably get by with one tenth of the staff contingent that it currently has.
So,
ultimately, what would benefit is free money.
You
banking.
don't agree with the almighty Zeus from on high? You don't believe that Jerome Powell is right to have 22,000 people working for him?
Yeah, there's that joke that America abandoned the gold standard and adopted the PhD standard. These, all-knowing, all-seeing, benevolent economists who shaped the economy, but according to their own designs. So I think that is, to me, is hugely encouraging. So I was quite bearish earlier about the trade question, but I think if people like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are given the latitude to really wield the axe and go after some of these inefficient, bloated state bureaucracies, I think that could really move the needle really substantially, because it's not just that taxpayers are paying for these useless jobs or for people to stay at home and work from home whilst everybody else has returned to normal economic life years ago after COVID. But it's that there's capital misallocation. These bureaucrats could actually be functional members of the economy and creating new value and generating new inputs, new wealth. So, i.e., being in more productive capacities rather than in these kind of non-jobs. And if you return to the original roots of the American system, it was premised on small government. This idea of a strong, powerful central executive is really quite a new phenomenon. It really took off under FDR and has grown inexorably since. So I think the big shift for me, and why I'm cautiously optimistic about Trump, is that I think for the first time you really have, at least in the 21st century, you really have a powerful politician questioning the very foundations of how the American system, as it currently is formed, and some of the misallocations, the inefficiencies, the redundancies. I mean, the fact that Trump is talking about closing the Department of Education and sending education back to the states, I think is really a powerful signal of, and actually the opposite of this government hubris that we were speaking about earlier with the Central Reserve. It's about saying, okay, well, education is important, but no amount of central planning and wise bureaucrats or politicians in Washington, D.C. can determine what education outcomes should be in this very large, diverse place called the United States. it should be sent down to the lowest levels. And that's a really powerful liberal position. That's to say, we trust individuals and to be able to operate in self-formed communities, to determine their own preferences in terms of how they raise their children, how they live their lives. It's not for a powerful politician to determine what their choices should be.
Well, I think that
I think is quite encouraging.
I think that's fantastic, but I'm not going to hold my breath. We've heard that Republicans promised to shut down the Department of Education for 30 years now, and it's actually 10 times larger than it was when they first said they were going to do it, spending over $200 billion per year. So I'm not going to hold my breath. And there are some functions that are there. The federal student loan program, which is now run by the government since Obama became president. He stole it from the private banks. In the past, all that happened is that the government sponsored those loans for low-income people, and only low-income people could qualify for them to level the playing field so that everyone had an equal opportunity to go to university. However, the Obama administration stole that from the private lenders, and now we, the people, make the loans to students. They've opened it up to everybody, so anybody can borrow money, and they raise the amounts, and that's one of the key drivers of inflation in higher education. Why educational institutions cost so much. So a few years ago, while I was still in active duty, I looked at the cost of tuition at Ohio University, where I did my undergraduate studies. And I looked at what I paid back in the 1980s, the late 1980s, and I compared it to the current tuition. And then I went into, the internet has these little machines where you can do the inflation rate over the years, and I did the inflation. And the cost of attending Ohio University was nearly 400% higher for the same degree that I got in the 1980s in inflation-adjusted dollars. Inflation-adjusted dollars. That's insane.
How much higher, sorry?
Well, it was nearly 400% higher. 4 times. Wow. At a state institution, not Harvard, at a state institution, which is supposed to be for everybody. They have increased tuition so much, and they've done it because of the free flow of money to people applying to universities, which allow them to raise the cost. It's insane. After inflation, it was even higher. If you took out inflation out, the numbers look worse, but of course you have to do inflation-adjusted dollars because you have to have the same purchasing power, and it was that much higher. So, that's a real problem. That's what drives inflation in education, one of the things. But, a few years ago, when Greece got in trouble, Italy got in trouble, Spain, Ireland, they began to fold Portugal like cheap suits with their monetary situation. The Germans intervened, the German central bank, to save Greece, and that stabilized things. At the time, I argued, and I still argue to this day, that had the United States not been bastardizing and devaluing our currency with the printing of money through quantitative easing, what a lovely phrase that is to talk about, cheapening your money supply. If we had not been doing that and bastardizing our currency, the euro would have collapsed. It would not have survived that time because people would have fled the euro and went to the dollar because it was unsustainable. But because the US dollar was in such poor condition as well, there was no safe haven to really flow to. So the dollar didn't chase the euro out of existence, and it's here. But all this stuff you're talking about, this monetizing of the debt by the Federal Reserve buying the debt and then piling it on top of us, we have to pay back later, and not at 0.25% interest, but at 4.5%, 5% now. That's going to be insane. We have to pay that bill. That is nothing more than quantitative easing in a different guise. It's just a new name for quantitative easing. These people have mortgaged our future with their reckless spending and their out-of-control behavior. And before I get back to you, just real quick, I did want to mention one other thing here, and that is as far as Doge and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, I wish them all the best. But only 18 cents on the dollar is discretionary spending. 82 cents of every dollar we are obliged to spend by federal law. The only way to change that is to change federal law. Now, the only obligation the United States has to pay anybody under our Constitution is our debt. Constitutionally, we must pay our debt. So that comes first. But after that, we don't have to pay Social Security benefits. We don't have to pay Medicare and Medicaid. Now, we might have a revolution if we stop paying it full stop, which isn't going to happen. But the only way to stop this is to freeze spending and let it not grow with inflation. Right there, if we freeze spending across the board, and we'd say we took a 10% cut, we would cut $700 billion out of the budget. That cuts almost half the deficit instantly, but we're not going to do that because that would cut benefits as well, and people are not going to do that. But Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have a task that's almost impossible in my view. They'll be able to cut a few $100 billion out of the discretionary budget, but they are not going to be able to attack the entitlements. And without attacking the entitlements, we have a problem here. And I think the answer to this in my book, and I'm going to get your take before you have to go here. The answer in my book is that corporate taxes get reduced. Trump took them down to 21%. They need to go down to 10%, in my view. I don't even think there should be corporate taxation because corporate taxation is a brake on the economy. If corporations aren't paying taxes, see, we're getting double and triple tax. You tax a corporation on making profits. They pay salaries. We get taxed on our income. Then when we spend the money, we get taxed on that. That's insane. How about you stop?
You're talking to a South African.
I know, but I'm also talking to a free market person who appreciates, the intervention of the government, how it distorts outcomes. But if we lower corporate taxes to 10%, that's going to flow tons of money back in the economy, job creation, investment, return on investment to investors who actually put money back in the economy and spend it. It's going to have a huge impact. There'll be a dip in the fiscus for the first year or two, and it'll be large. But then every time Bush did tax cuts, 2 of them, Trump did tax cuts, within 2 years, the Federal Reserve set record amounts of income from taxation after taxes were cut, personal income taxes and corporate taxes. So, I mean, there's a way out of this. We increase revenue. I'm not big on taxation, but we increase it simply by the growth of the economy, and then we hold the line on spending. But Vivek and Elon, good luck to you guys, but that's a tough job. If they want someone
all for lowering taxes, I mean, that's hugely important. But in Trump 1, he didn't really reduce government expenditure. Obviously, he would argue, well, it was COVID at the end.
He didn't. And you're correct.
He juiced the economy. I mean, yeah.
Well, no, it didn't juice the economy. They just, the spending was the same level. Didn't increase it until COVID. Then they increased it, but that's still a $500-600 billion deficit each year they inherited from Obama and continued to carry on while the economy didn't grow. But then it began to grow in the end, and he dropped it. It was down to 400 something before COVID came. But then COVID, they they threw it out the window.
You got to reduce taxes and cut expenditure.
Correct.
Because otherwise that deficit's just going to widen, and you kicking that can down the road. I mean, I suppose one point in Trump's favor is that he doesn't have to run for re-election, and he has the House and the Senate behind him now. So some of these changes potentially could be made. But I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, he is a politician. He's going to be looking at his ratings. He's not going to be wanting to wind back Medicaid and Medicare overnight, right? And maybe, like with some of his transactional approaches to foreign policy, he could get European nations to start paying their fair share of NATO contributions, and maybe reducing contributions to the United Nations and some of these other global bureaucracies, which really are just sponges for value, and they just kind of suck the life out of the US. So so I think maybe, but I think you are right. You got to make those really big trade-offs. I think maybe as industrious as Ramaswamy and Musk are, if they're just going to be reducing marginal expenditure, I mean, I think that's nothing to complain about. But I think you're going to need to be a lot more aggressive. I mean, we see in Argentina with Javier Milei, I mean, their crisis is unique and very aggressive. The inflation that they had, there was like triple-digit inflation. But that's given Milei a mandate to go in and really aggressively cut spending. And I mean, he's tilting towards free trade. He's reducing barriers. He's reducing subsidies. And I mean, he's doing that sometimes gradually, but he's moving with a sense of urgency because he also feels the sword of Damocles hanging over him. He might not be in power forever. So I think there's some lessons to be learned there of front loading the pain and really, and I am pleased to see that Trump is already making cabinet appointments and, he's sending some strong signals, but really the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Can he actually push back against this, the bureaucracy? That's going to be a hard task.
No, 100%. I'm with you. David, you've been very generous with your time, and we could talk for hours, but I know you've got other commitments, so we'll wrap up here in a second. Hang on a second. This is from the Trump team. Yeah. No, sure. Absolutely. Pretoria? Yeah, I'm up for it. Let me know. Hatfield's a lovely place. Happy to do it, sir. Okay. No, just kidding.
Ambassador Chris Wyatt.
Yeah, there we go. No, but seriously, have a little fun with that while he's naming his picks. But we'll see how it goes with Trump. But I'm hopeful. I'm
Last
very
time it
hopeful.
took Trump 2 years to appoint an ambassador to South Africa. So we were all
Well,
left wondering.
Unfortunately, I don't have working in my favor that I make $15,000 handbags and I speak terrible Xhosa. If I did, maybe I speak terrible Afrikaans. Maybe that'll qualify me. But but seriously, we'll see what happens with that. The U.S. does need to make the right appointment to South Africa. The Biden administration thought they made the right pick in Ruben Brigidi. Interest full disclosure, he was my boss, the ambassador at the U.S. mission in the African Union. I work for him directly and I know him personally. So nothing to say good or bad about him. But I'm not so sure that the Biden administration put their best foot forward in Africa, not just South Africa, but across the continent, where they lowered staff and ignored the continent. Trump probably won't put much of a focus on Africa because that's just the historical norm for the United States. It's the rare president that spends time focusing on Africa. But Trump's policies, if they're successful, will benefit Africa and Africans and certainly South Africans. We'll see what happens going forward. And as far as AGOA, you were spot on earlier. The biggest benefit for South Africa comes from largely from subsidized industries, us buying BMW parts coming out of Port Elizabeth, things like that. The wine industry, which is less subsidized but important, we buy wine. And that's pretty much a lot of our trade with South Africa. But the U.S. is South Africa's second largest trading partner. We were historically the largest forever, and then China surpassed us a decade ago. But we're still the second largest. And you can't ignore your second largest trading partner. You got to have a good relationship with them because it could affect a lot of jobs in South Africa one way or another. That's outside of AGOA. So anyway, that's just some thoughts on that. David, I'm going to give you a chance to give your final thoughts, and I suspect you may have a message of hope about maybe we are righting the ship globally, although we have a lot of challenges with this quantitative easing disguised as the monetizing of our debt here in the U.S., and that affects the world. I mean, look, people may not like it, but when America gets the sniffles, the world gets the flu. And we really need to pay attention to that as Americans and as those interested in free trade around the world for the betterment of humanity. As you said at the outset of this, this comes from China. I was produced here in America. My brain was developed here in America. And my house was built here in America with materials from our forest and from our mines. It's a global integrated economy, and all this is possible by people working together. I'm not a New World Order guy, but I mean, just, common sense says you got to have smart approaches here. Every country is entitled to its sovereignty and protecting its own citizens. And hopefully that doesn't come down to protectionism when it comes to economics. Sometimes it does. But whatever the case is, I'm looking forward to a very exciting time going forward. And I'll let you know one more thing before I turn over to you is that I live in I don't know if you could call it Trump country, but I live in an area that's predominantly conservative, in which 2/3 of the voters in my county vote Republican. That doesn't mean they're conservative, but that's a huge starting point for conservatives. And you could argue maybe it's Trump country because he got like 60+% of the vote in this county. And I have to say that in the months leading up to the election, when I would say hi to people walking around, people were kind of glum. I started wondering if people were mad at me. I don't even know these people. I just say hi to people. It's my nature. I grew up on a farm. And, driving a car, I wave to people on country roads. Just, I know it's crazy, but it's what I do. But this week, every time I go out of the house and I go to neighboring towns and all over the area, everywhere I go, people are sunny. And they're smiling and they're greeting me. I mean, people just say, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, do I know that person? I just didn't recognize them. I'm scrambling my brain in the hard drive. It's almost as if a weight has been lifted off of our shoulders here. That's just anecdotal, but I'm telling you, it's like a new day in America. Now, the Trump administration is going to have to prove it, and I'm going to hold them to account, like I always do. But there's been a big sense of relief. And in my South African audience, I get the same impression. A lot of South Africans, at least those who watch my program, seem to be like, oh, thank goodness our nightmare is over. Anyway, what are your thoughts? I'll give you the floor. Final closing thoughts from David Ansara, the CEO of the Free Market Foundation. Thank you, David.
Well, look, the thing that I'm most bullish about with Trump is his endorsement of Bitcoin. And I mean, we've even seen signals that he's interested in potentially establishing a strategic reserve for the US government. And we've seen the price of Bitcoin surge. And Bitcoin is an antidote to some of the problems we were talking about earlier around, it's an entirely decentralized, state-proof currency. You don't have trusted third parties that are going to potentially manipulate the supply, and that distinguishes Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies, which we know who the developers are, and they could be lobbied or pressurized or coerced.
Like Doge?
Yeah, Doge price is surging, but I mean, ultimately Doge is creation of Elon Musk, right? So, and we don't want to have to trust anybody. It must be trustless. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin. And so, I think openness to that is going to be hugely refreshing. The SEC has been really hostile actively to Bitcoin. Trump has indicated that he's going to replace the incumbent at the SEC. And so, I think what really has made America great, it's people with a vision, people who've pursued freedom, they've embraced creativity, and they've taken risks, and they've staked their capital and their reputations on thinking big and doing great things. And so I don't think Donald Trump will make America great again, but I think Americans can make America great again if they embrace freedom. And Bitcoin is one of those instruments of freedom. And I think that that's potentially going to be a game changer. And, ultimately something like the US dollar is underpinned by confidence in that political system, and that confidence can ebb. We're seeing a high point at the moment. There's a lot of goodwill and political capital, but things can change. And so what I think this is a great opportunity for, to use an overworn term in the 2020s, a reset, but a reset, not a great reset like the World Economic Forum, but actually getting back to the core principles of what made America great in the first place and what can make other countries great if they follow that example, which is embracing freedom, free enterprise, the rule of law. We haven't really spoken about that, how US legal institutions have been weaponized against political opponents. So I think mental ingredients of 1776, the basic premise for America, I think is what will make America great again.
Well, David Ansara, excellent, wise words. I think we've all raised a few IQ points in this conversation. At least it feels that way.
I learned a lot, so thanks, Chris.
No, I appreciate it. No, that's see, and what you just said is exactly what's going on here. The free flow of ideas. Thinking, taking risk. I'm taking a risk by going on YouTube, that's for sure. No, but seriously, but I mean, we're exchanging ideas. We're talking about things and having cogent conversations that are made possible by this global marketplace where people have exchanged ideas and built things. I mean, this is like the coolest microphone, although it's been acting up lately. I mean, I just tap it and it goes silent. Can you hear me now? I mean, just think about that. I mean, 20 years ago, this was something only music studios had, is something of this capability. But for like $100 and some bucks, you can buy one of these things now. Yours looks like it's plated in titanium there, which might make it very valuable. Your microphone, looking at your microphone, it's not really titanium.
It might look old school, but it's it's an El Cheapo. But Chris, I just want to say thanks a lot for having me on the show. And I think us in South Africa, we really appreciate your interest in what's going on here and your outside perspective. So, really great to chat to you.
Well, it's my pleasure, likewise. And thanks for your thoughts from a South African perspective on what's happening here in the U.S. It's nice to get that from that side and not coming from, well, I won't mention the person by name. I'll leave it off. I was going to mention a so-called journalist, but I don't want to get you involved in that. So anyway, thanks a lot. David Ansara, the CEO of the Free Market Foundation. If you're not familiar with the Free Market Foundation or David Ansara, folks, look below the video. There's links to the Free Market Foundation. It looks like it's been a while since he's published on the Daily Friend. Both of us are published authors on the Daily Friend, but I think he's been busy since he became CEO, so I don't see any recent articles there unless I missed them. But his other social media links are there, including his YouTube channel, which is woefully undersubscribed. Please go to David Ansara's YouTube channel and subscribe to it. We really appreciate that. David, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the week. I've got to prepare for rugby. The Springboks are playing England this weekend, and I'm going to have an emergency medical team at Twickenham because it's going to be a bloodbath as England is obliterated.
Well, yeah, but I didn't even know there was rugby on, so I think you're paying more attention than I am.
Oh my goodness, the man can't speak Afrikaans. He doesn't know about rugby. Is he really a South African? Next thing you know, he's going to say, "Braai, what's a braai? Is that a barbecue?"
No, look, every South African with his salt knows how to braai, myself included.
There you go. All right, David, I'll let you drop off and I'll wrap up. Thanks a lot for your time. You've been very generous.
All right, cool. Thanks, Chris. Bye.
All right, folks. David Ansara from the Free Market Foundation. My thanks to David. It was a Leka conversation, and I really appreciate him coming on. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the kind of conversation that for some folks is kind of esoteric, and it doesn't draw huge audiences, but it draws interested audience and people that want to learn. As David said, he learned some things, and I certainly learned some things from our conversation. I really enjoyed it. It's nice to talk about these topics in a cogent, lucid manner, which is what we did. Anyway, I'll be back with the news here in about an hour. So I haven't set that broadcast up. So if you want to join us again and discuss today's news, that'll be coming on in an hour. Big developments here in the United States where Donald Trump is naming cabinet selections unbelievably fast, almost in record time here, names coming out left and right. Some of them a little surprising. We'll talk about that in the next hour. And the U.S. House of Representatives was finally called last night for the Republicans. They've secured 218 seats and a majority in the House with 9 seats up for grabs. Still, they're likely to get 2 more of those and a possibly 2 more beyond that. We'll see. But the Republican majority is at risk because Trump has now taken 3 members of the House of Representatives who were just elected and is removing them from the House, which could put that majority in jeopardy. We'll see. We'll talk about more about that next hour. Thanks for tuning in. And once again, my thanks to David Ansara from the Free Market Foundation. Always a pleasure. What a gentleman. What an insightful mind. Thank you so much. Folks, catch you later. God bless and have a lovely day if you're not able to make it to the news with us. And we'll see you here shortly on the program for that news. Cheers.
I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming, it's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.